today on the Jessica Rector Show. How did your second and third marriage affect your daughter?
Domestic violence does have a wonderful, wonderful program.
Was that kind of a wake-up call to you?
And you are going to have a mastectomy.
How did you get out of it? How did you realize that you needed to do something to get out of it? If you like my look, stay tuned and I'll tell you how to get it. Welcome to the Jessica Rector Show. My name is Jessica Rector. What do you do when your life seems to be spiraling out of control? How do you actually motivate yourself to pick yourself up, put the pieces back together, and continue life every day? Today we're talking with my guest Sherry, who has been through this and absolutely picks herself back up. Thank you for joining me today, Sherry.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, we're going to start with your marriages. We're going to start with the first one when you were 17. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I met this individual actually at a church camp, which I thought was kind of interesting. And he was considerably older than I, but I thought, he sounds like he might be a nice guy. And I had been raised in a very strict religious home, and I really was looking for some freedom. And I thought, marriage will give you freedom.
Right.
How little did I know? But,
at 17?
At 17.
And how old was he?
He was 26.
Oh, okay.
So he was almost 9 years older than I. And so we ended up getting married not too long after that. We met in August and we were married the day after, or actually the 1st of January.
Wow.
So it was a very short courtship, and I ran off and got married at 17.
What did your parents say?
They weren't happy. Not at all. Actually,
did they find out afterwards?
They found out right before we decided to get married, and I had gone to Texas where his family lived and was staying with his family, and
right.
My dad actually even came to get me because he was really
wow.
upset. But I didn't want to go home, and I didn't, and I stayed, and I went ahead and got married, and the rest was history.
And so how long did the marriage last?
It lasted about 5 days short of 2 years. I ended up having my daughter when I was 18, got married at 17, had her at 18, and we were divorced by the time I was 19. So
that's a lot to go through in just a couple years.
Yes, a very short time.
And things just didn't work out? You figured out that you were in two different places in the marriage?
Well, I think because he was so much older, I think I was really looking for a father figure, not knowing, because I really, at that time, even though I was trying to get my freedom and be out of the house, I was
right.
still looking for that, that affection, I think, that I felt like I was missing, and that acceptance, and thinking that I would get it from him. And unfortunately, he was more in a control type personality, controlling, and it became very verbally abusive, emotionally abusive. And so I ended up staying in that marriage as long as I absolutely could. And then it got to a point where it was beginning to be physically abusive, and so I had to leave my daughter and I just for our safety.
And so tell me about the second marriage. How long was it between your first and second marriage, and why did you get married the second time?
I ended up getting married. I knew this person for 2 years. We ended up getting married, and he was actually an alcoholic, which I didn't fully understand. I'd been very sheltered and raised in this Christian environment.
Right.
I don't think I ever had anything to drink until I was in my 20s. But so I knew him for a couple of years. We got married when I was 23, so it was about maybe 4 years later. And of course, the abuse was happening already, but I kept thinking, it was my fault. I really did. I felt like I was saying things that were provoking his anger, or I was doing something that provoked him. And
when did you realize it wasn't your fault?
I think after I think the final abusive incident took place, and that was when I began to come to terms with, after we were separated and then going through the divorce, I began to realize it was a little at a time, but I began to see that, I wasn't the problem. I was the victim,
Right. And so what did you do in order to leave?
We actually tried to hold the marriage together. We really did. And I think, people usually do one of two things. They'll either have a child to try to hold it together,
right.
which just creates more pressure and more challenges sometimes. And in this case, of course, that wasn't an option. But the other thing, I think they turn to, spiritual or religious support or whatever they feel would help them in a counseling situation. What he agreed to do was to go to church with me. And I thought, well, we'll give it a shot. We'll see if it works. And of course, that was something I felt like I was missing. I'd been out of church
right.
for so long. so we did that, and he decided after that he really didn't want anything to do with church, and I felt like that was my only hope. I really didn't see that he was going to change, and he didn't feel that he had a problem. And of course I was going through abuse every single weekend. It was very, very difficult, and the police had actually said the last time that I needed to take steps to get out of the relationship and be able to file charges, otherwise I may not survive the next attack.
Were you working at the time?
I was working, and but I just kind of felt like, you know, I was the one that was supporting the relationship.
Right.
He wasn't working. I was the one supporting his drinking.
So it was easy for you, it was easy in the financial aspect for you to leave because you had money, but there's women out there who don't have money.
Absolutely, and I do realize that because I've talked to so many women since then that have gone through or are going through situations to where they feel like there's no place to turn.
And what do you say to them?
Well, first of all, of course, domestic violence does have a wonderful, wonderful program, and they will help the person get restraining orders and be able to get into housing and you know, locations to where they're safe and protected. And I feel like it's very important for them to make that decision and go ahead and do that for themselves and for their children if there are children in the relationship.
Right. And also you can visit my website, www.jessicarector.com, and we will have a resource page pertaining to domestic violence and also to other topics that we talk about today. So tell me a little bit about your third marriage.
Well, my third marriage didn't take place for another 10 years. I was 33 years old at the time when we got married.
How did you not give up on love at this point?
You know, I went through a number of dating relationships in the meantime. Of course, nothing ever survived that 6-week time frame. Right. I don't know what it is. It was just like
mine's a 4-week time frame.
Okay. Well,
I'm like,
you know,
month.
Well, and you know, honestly, I think we each have our own limits, you know.
I think
and
so.
we think if we can make it just past that hump, we'll be doing really well, and it may have potential. But with me, it was a 6-week cutoff. I don't know what it was. It would either not go the distance or what. But I remember with this particular relationship, I ended up meeting him at church. I was involved in our singles ministry there, and you know, that was a good place to meet someone, I thought, and I still do. I feel like it's a good place, regardless, whatever you have an interest in and wherever you feel like you can get support, emotional support, and you're able to be yourself. It's good to meet people in group environments because you can actually just be you.
Right.
You don't have to be somebody else trying to be in order to get their attention.
So how long did that marriage last?
We were married for 12 years.
And why did it end?
I think it was because our personalities were very different, which of course I'm a talker and he was a listener. I thought that was a perfect combination.
I mean, if you're both talking, you don't have...
There's no communication.
Yes.
But, you know, what I didn't realize was that he was a very passive individual. And I didn't know that he actually had passive-aggressive tendencies. And so, you know, the first 6 years were wonderful. And, you know, I was going places and very directed, and I knew what I wanted, and I think he enjoyed that, and he liked that and saw that in me, and that's what he was drawn to. The last 6 years there was a role reversal. We went through some changes in a business that I had that was very devastating to us financially, and it was some decisions I thought we had made together, but after the problem started setting in, all of a sudden it was my fault and that I should have done something different. He should have stepped in and made me do something different, and unfortunately I didn't realize he felt that way. And it just really created a lot of conflict. How
did your second and third marriage affect your daughter?
Oh my gosh, it was very traumatic for her. And I think she still goes through issues and challenges in the fact that she has a distrust of men sometimes in certain settings. And you know, she's had to struggle with that father image, really wanting to be, see, she never really knew her father. We divorced at the time she was only 1 year old. And he never was part of her life, so it was very difficult for her. She's kind of come through some things since then, but she just turned 30 actually over the weekend, this last weekend, and I have a wonderful grandson that's 5, and she's married and happy, and I think it's great that, you know, good things can come of
But did it bring you guys closer together?
We did. We were very, very close. We actually kind of raised each other. You know, I was so young when I had her, and then, you know, of course, we were just by ourselves for that 10-year time period in between marriages, so that when I did remarry again for the third time, you know, Stephanie and I were just so close, and it was difficult, I think, that transition of having somebody come into our family and then become the father figure that she never had. So there was some adjustments that we had to make that were really interesting. I'll tell you, for that first year, it was really kind of an uphill battle in a lot of ways.